Quran that can bring that together, not just from faith outsiders, but from faith insiders?
Gosh, that's a big question. I think one of the things that in my book, I only have one, so that I tried to do was to understand what the Quran was trying to understand, what the Quran was talking about when it spoke of kitab, and I think I identified in the tradition somehow a tendency to close down what kitab means, and I think in the Quran it's a very rich notion, much broader than simply the text of the scripture, and I think you can see in the tradition also a sense that the text of the Quran, the recitation and the reciting of it, the living inside that text, is not living inside a confined space. I mean, that text, that the recitations given by God are the way into the relationship with God, which is inexhaustible. They're the point of access to what God has to say, which, as the Quran itself says, if all the forests of the earth were pens, and you had the seven seas and seven more like them made of ink, what God has to say would still not be exhausted. So I think perhaps in contemporary times, I think we'll have a paper on this tomorrow. Or was that what Al-Waleed was going to speak about? What has happened is you've had a kind of Protestantization of Islam in various ways, and a reducing of God's kitab to simply the text, and the text in its immediate relationship to the individual believer, and forget about the tradition. So I think you have all the richness in the Islamic tradition of the tradition. I mean, you have millions, maybe over the centuries they all add up to billions of people who have lived inside God speaking to them, and who have created a civilization and cultures and languages and literatures, and who have lived fruitfully and creatively for centuries in this relationship with God's speaking to them. So I think you got it there, but it's too easy to kind of close the thing down, and this is why I always get furious when Christian commentators and even cardinals come out and say, well, what the Muslims need is a reformation. The Reformation has come, and since when were cardinals in favor of the Protestant Reformation? It's okay if Muslims have it, but
if it's a very short question.
Then they say they need to have the French Revolution. Would that be with or without the Reign of Terror?
I'm going to just quickly piggyback off of Dr. Dagley's question about the tafsir, going back to the comment of tafsir.
Can you come a little bit closer to the microphone?
Sure.
Thank you.
You mentioned quite a bit about how is it Muslims can refine their understanding of the Quran by looking at scholarships of the Jews and the Christians, and the research that they've done with the Semitic rhetoric and things of this sort. How is it that for the Christians and the Jews looking at the Quran, how can it inform their faith or deepen their faith in their own books?
Just to respond to what you said in the question there, I think I was trying to say the text of the Quran needs to be put back in conversation with the textual tradition and the oral traditions that it tells us it's addressing. I'm not saying Muslims need to learn from Michel Kuipers and Angelika Neuwirth and all these. That wasn't my point. To me, the reading of the Quran is essential, and Gabriel Reynolds in the end of his book says it ought to be on the syllabus in all universities and seminaries. Why? Because it is part of the conversation about what God is doing. The Quran challenges Christian faith, and that's fine. I don't mind being challenged, and I think the challenge is justifiable in some cases. I think when the Qur'an criticizes Christians for believing in three gods, well, Karl Rahner, the very important German theologian, and if you're going to be an important theologian, you really have to be German. Karl Rahner said he believed that most Christians are in fact tritheist, that they're not Trinitarian, because Trinitarianism very easily falls over into tritheism. Trinitarianism is the belief that there is only one God, and I'm probably going to get the Spanish Inquisition will arrive at any minute if I try and give you 30 seconds on the Trinity, but the Trinity is insisting on the unity of God, and but that unity is not an utterly simple unity. There are facets of God, there are aspects of God. We have a problem with our language, and Rahner, so that even mainstream Catholic theology is recognizing that some of the things that the Qur'an says are valid objections, and we need to take because basically what we're saying is how many Muslims are there in the world today? 1.2 billion, 1.3 billion? I don't know. Christians have to take account of the fact that there are 1.3 billion people in the world today who believe in the one God of Abraham and Moses and Jesus and so on, who find Christian proclamation of their faith completely incomprehensible. So Christians need to read the Quran and take it seriously and learn how to respond and say, well, yes, okay, our father-son language is an issue. Now, what are we trying to say with father-son language? Are we saying God is just part of the great chain of fathers and sons? No. But so the reading of the Quran, because it is part of this this great discourse, world of discourse, is essential to Christians, I think.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking both our panelists.